Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a malt whisky. The whisky concerned is from the Bunnahabhain Distillery on Islay, and this is their Stiuireadair, which is a malt with no age indication. It's an unpeated malt that's been aged in sherry casks. Now, Bunnahabhain, in translation from Scots Gaelic, means mouth of the river, and this relates to the distillery's site at the mouth of the Margadale River. And the Margadale Spring is what provides the water that's used to distill this whisky. Evidently, the name Stiuireadair translates to steersman or helmsman, and this references the fact that the distillery was founded in 1881. But actually up until 1960 it could only be reached by ship, and in fact deliveries still went on there by sea up until the 1990s because it was quite a narrow access road that had been created to it. But this is the name they've now chosen to give this whisky, which is a brand that will sort of supplant their 12-year-old as their entry-level whisky. Although it has no age statement on its label, my understanding is that this is produced predominantly from casks that are between 7 and 10 years old. Islay, the island where this whisky is produced, I think it's pronounced Islay, although it's spelt Islay, is the southernmost of the Inner Hebrides Islands, so we're to the west of Scotland, and actually these islands are warmed by the Gulf Stream, the stream of warmer water coming up from the Bay of Biscay. I guess Islay is known most for its quite peaty styles of whisky, things like Lagavulin and Laphroaig. This is a little different. As I say, it's an unpeated whisky, and in general Bunnahabhain is known for producing lighter and more elegant styles of whisky without such a heavy peat influence. As I mentioned, the distillery was founded in 1881. Its founders were a combination of somebody called William Robertson and the Greenlees brothers. Evidently the first distillation took place in 1883. And the distillery functioned for about 98 years, until in 1981 a slump in demand for whisky saw it mothballed for 3 years. But it reopened relatively quickly in 1984, and then in 2003 the distillery was bought by a company called Burns Stewart. They were taken over in 2014 by another company called Distell, and eventually Bunnahabhain was subsumed into the Heineken group when they took over Distell. So to make this whisky, they started out with unpeated barley. Now, of the production at Bunnahabhain, probably about 60% of the whisky is made with unpeated barley, and for the remaining 40% they'll use lightly peated barley. This is combined with water that's come from the Margadale Spring. This is hot water, and they're combined in a mash tun to create wort. Now that wort is then put into Oregon pine washbacks, huge fermenting tanks. The fermentation starts that creates a small beer or wash. That wash is then fermented in a pair of wash stills. Now, Bunnahabhain is famous for having some of the largest stills anywhere in the Scotch whisky industry, and certainly has the tallest stills of any distillery on Islay. And that actually means that the heavier elements of the distillate don't make it up to the top of the necks of the stills, and therefore return to the body of the still, leaving a lighter spirit. The condensed production of the stills then goes to a pair of spirit stills and is re-fermented there. And it's the middle cut of this second distillation that ends up in a spirit receiver and is then transferred to oak casks for maturation. As I mentioned, maturation goes on in sherry casks. These are first and second use, so that's first and second use after having been used for sherry, of course. Now, when the final blend for this malt is assembled, the blenders will combine a number of different casks of different ages and from different locations within the warehouse, because the different temperatures and humidities within the warehouse will enable the different barrels to age and give slightly different characteristics to the whisky within them. And then finally, to try and preserve all the delicate aromatics into the whisky, these whiskies are not chill filtered. So there is a danger that if you get them cold, you may see a protein haze created in them. But the idea is to try and maintain the delicate aromas of the whisky as best possible. They also make a point that the whisky isn't coloured. Prior to bottling, the strength of the whisky is reduced using spring water from the Margadale Spring. And this has been brought down to a strength of 46.3% alcohol. So it's not at cask strength, it's also above the minimum permitted strength for Scotch whisky, which is 40%. So let's have a look at it, shall we? The first thing I'd say is there's a beautiful sort of bronze colour there. If I swill it, not surprisingly, it clings to the edge of the glass. The strength of the whisky would ensure that. Just before nosing it, I'll add just a tiny touch of water, and the idea is just to help to release the aromas. You don't need too much because this isn't a cask strength whisky, but it'll help stop those more delicate aromas from being smothered by the alcohol. There really is a lovely delicate aroma here. My first impression is heather, and then you get a really quite honeyed note coming through, probably from the sherry casks. So you have notes of a sort of rich, almost sultana or raisin-like notes from the sherry. You have notes from the cask. There's cedary, probably more vanilla. There is a high-toned spirity note, but there's also a rich sort of almost honeyed aroma as well. There's plenty to find in here, but again, that delicate heather note returns on the end of the nose. So let's have a taste. The whisky is smooth textured. Its warmth is more to the front of the mouth, where there's a beautiful richness. Again, there's a sort of a honeyed note. There is a little warmth and spiritiness, but that's actually picking out some lovely nutmeg and cinnamon notes that are coming from the cask aging. There's a vanilla note and honey down on the middle of my tongue, but the flavours are much more to the front of the mouth. So yes, this is a smooth, rounded, elegant whisky. There are fiery and spicy hints, but as they fade, they leave you with those notes of dried fruit, sultana, notes of vanilla, notes of honey, and notes of heather. And actually it's the delicate heathery notes that are lasting. So yes, this is an whisky that isn't showing that sort of iodine peat note that you would get with something like Carl Islay, Lagavulin or Lafroig. I guess it's much less challenging, and I think this would appeal to a broader spectrum of consumers than some of those more pungent malt whiskies that I've mentioned. At the same time, the flavours are harmonious. They develop very nicely on the palate and linger beautifully. So yes, I think that's a nicely rounded malt whisky that would appeal to a large number of consumers. I had a look at our Wine Search aggregated critics score for this particular whisky, and that's currently sitting at 91 out of 100, which I think is a very fair score for a distillery's entry-level malt whisky. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, it would be fantastic if you'd press the like button for us. We'd really appreciate that. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, the best answer would be to subscribe to our channel, and that way you can set yourself an alert and be told every time we release a new video. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please pass it on to them. We'd really appreciate that from you. I will leave a link in the comments box below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this particular whisky, and you can see if it's available in your market, and if so, at what price. There's also more background notes there into, say, Islay, into how malt whisky is produced. There's a pricing history there. You can see both critics' reviews and notes from other users there. So hopefully there's plenty of information that can help you if you're looking to make a purchase. If there are any comments you'd like to leave about the tastings we're doing, the whiskies, the wines, or whatever that we're tasting, or anything else that relates to that, please pop your comments in the box below. We'd really be interested to hear your feedback on what we're doing here. So thank you once again for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.